And welcome back. So I'm going to do a little bit of a different video today. Well, it's still Hemi content, but I'm going to bring you back to the our 6.4 Hemi, our 2500 that we did the work to starting last August, September time frame. So not quite a year since we completed the work, but pretty close. If you remember, the Supercharger was already on this particular Hemi a few years ago, but last year, if you remember in our video series, we tore the top engine apart, put in a higher performance cam, hardened push rods, non-MDS lifters, and kind of cleaned everything up on the top end and reassembled everything as kind of the next phase in performance for this truck. Along with that, we put a much deeper and bigger transmission pan in and did a transmission filter service on that. And just a little bit of trivia for you on this particular transmission on this Hemi, there are two filters. There is a screw-on filter that kind of looks a lot like a screw-on oil filter, as well as the traditional transmission filter. So there's actually two in this one. But with that being said, tomorrow the truck is being brought in for its annual inspection, because yes, I live in one of those states in which we have to get a safety and emissions inspection every year as part of renewing our tags on our license plates. So one thing I like to do is give the old girl a nice wash and wax, and hopefully camera does justice to the nice mirror finish on the paint job there. And along with doing a nice wash and wax and doing a good job of cleaning up the interior, just in general, I like to do the oil change that coincides with the annual inspection. And now it doesn't mean I'm doing one oil change per year. I am on the adage of either every 3 months or 3,000 miles I do an oil change. That's kind of an old school way of thinking, I admit. And I know that the manufacturers, as well as the engineers of this vehicle, have written into the manual that, supposedly using synthetic oils, you can go a lot longer than that. This is just my preference. I still prefer to do them every 3 months or 3,000 miles and just kind of go from there. I mean, to each their own. If you want to go longer oil change interval, yeah, that's perfectly fine. It's your vehicle. But to kind of tell you how things have been going so far, knock on wood, everything's been running like a top. Haven't had an issue with any of the performance modifications that were done to this engine yet. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because of the old Rona, and everybody's still kind of getting over that. My workplace still has us largely working from home. So the old daily driver here, and yes, I do use a 2500 as a daily driver, believe it or not, doesn't see or hasn't seen too much mileage this year. It has seen some, but not as much as a stereotypical, if the world was still normal, type yearly mileage. But in any case, we're going to proceed forward with doing the oil change on this, which also includes changing the oil and the supercharger head unit. I do those deliberately at the same time, just so I know they've kept on the same schedule. And that's also what is recommended by the supercharger manufacturer ProCharger, is that you change the oil in this when you do your vehicle change. Now, that may vary with different kits. I can't speak for the other ones, but I do believe they said that if on this one, that if you change your oil every 3 months to 3,000, then that would be adequate for doing the supercharger head unit. So if you're not doing your oil 3 months or 3,000, you may have to do the head unit off schedule for when you do the motor. Anyway, FYI. But with any supercharger kit that ProCharger sells, since they're self-contained units, just verify with the particular ProCharger manual, the service interval for that. So what you see down here on the ground, and this is the oil and preference that I use, again, because it's recommended by Mopar. It's just 0W40. And in case you're wondering, that's exactly what is written on the oil cap for a 6.4 2500 of the 2016 variety. 0W40. I prefer to use Wicks oil filters on my setups, and there's the number for you there. They make two different versions of a 57060. They make one that has a dash XP, which I think is their extended life filter. This is just a standard 57060. If you remember in the previous video, I buy these in a what they call a fleet pack, and I think there's about 12 of these filters per pack. It works out a little bit cheaper per filter because you're buying them in bulk. We got 7 quarts of oil here, and you may be asking yourself, why 7? Well, what can I say? Hemi, she loves her oil. And we also have oil for the Supercharger head unit. This comes from ProCharger, and when you order the kit, you get 3 6-ounce bottles, so it's enough for 3 oil changes of that head unit. Obviously, the amount of oil will vary depending on the particular kit and particular head unit that you have. And along with the 3 they give you extra O-ring seals for the dipstick, that tube that comes out of the head unit, as well as additional sealing washers in case you need them or in case they get lost. Let's close that up, and you can see even on the outside of the package, there's another set of seals just kind of taped to the box. So they want to make sure that you've got those seals in place on that dipstick tube, and I'll show you that just to make sure that it doesn't leak. So let me get things set up underneath the truck, and we'll get the oil drained out, and I'll show you how I handle that. I'll talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So we got you underneath, and just to recap, you can see our beefed up transmission pan that we put on as part of our rebuild, and that was from Mag High Tech. You can see it there, and the particular model of this pan is a 45 RFE, and we couldn't go with the deeper pan. They make a pan that's kind of level all the way across, and it's a little bit deeper because you can see that we have the exhaust that crosses over the transmission, so we had to go with this one. This one, if I recall, still gives you about 1.5 quarts. I believe it's 1.5 to 2 quarts of additional fluid capacity, as well as if you go back and look at the videos when we installed this, this is a much thicker aluminum milled pan, along with the cooling fans that you see here on the pan. Does a bit better job of keeping that transmission fluid cool for you. But what I want to show you was the Femoto valve here. So a couple of years ago, you may have seen this if you watched our videos when we did the build on this 2500. We put in this valve here, so it takes the place of the oil plug that would normally be here. The nice thing about these are I don't have to crawl underneath here with a wrench and break this loose. All I have to do is take this little black locking tab off, and this also locks in place. In other words, with this tab out, this just won't swing forward. You can see I can't push it forward. I actually have to push it up and then over, and then when I do that, this valve will open. We'll start to drain our oil into our catch pan below it. Just get the catch pan in the right place, and we can get this party started. There we go. You can see, yeah, it doesn't give you as wide of an opening on this particular model of Fumoto valve, but it'll still drain. It may take it a few minutes longer to accomplish the goal, but that's what I like about that. And yes, this is spring loaded. It does have a catch on it, so when this locks, it locks in place and closes. And I think we've run this particular valve when we first put the Supercharger unit on, maybe about 1 or 2 years afterwards. So we've probably had this particular valve on here now for, let's see, this is the 2016, since probably about, let's see, 2016, 17, 18, 19, since somewhere probably around 2019, we've been running this valve, and we've never had an issue of it even so much as dripping oil. And the individual I saw this from, he has a YouTube channel called Work Play Drive, if I remember correctly. I believe I have his channel linked in my description. And that's where I first saw this. And of course you can see from the color of this oil, it's not very dirty at all. It's not black in color. It still has a nice golden tinge to it, but it has been in here for X number of months. So we are doing this oil change more based on months rather than mileage. So that being said, we're going to let that drain out, and when that's done, I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. You can see we're down to about a drip. It probably took about probably about 5 minutes or so to drain the oil out of it. It wasn't too terrible. So all I'm going to do is take this valve, push it, and you can see that little ball valve in there closing. Hopefully you can. I'll show you that there. You hear that click. So it actually falls, the lever actually falls into a recess that's on here and keeps you from being able to pull that forward. But for the extra protection, the manufacturer also has these. You can buy extra of these because they are made out of plastic in case you should break one. But you'll see this here has a little slotted in. This goes, clips in place and goes in between. So the little lever goes in between the slots that are on this piece, this locking tab. Goes in place and clips like that, and it just sits over here as just an additional protection measure to keep you from being able to pull that forward without pulling that tab off first. So there we go. We got our oil drained out. We're going to go ahead and get our filter out next. And I know, sorry for the noise, this isn't really riveting entertainment, but it is one of the things that you must do to a vehicle. Just standard scheduled maintenance. So let me get you swung around here and I'll bring you back and we'll get this filter out. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we're at the front of the truck. And yes, if you hadn't already asked yourself the question as to why there's such a small oil filter on such a big engine, don't worry, I've asked myself the same question many times. But you can see one of the things they're kind of limited by is space, because the radiator hose for the lower radiator hose, I should say, that comes off of the water pump, if the oil filter gets too big around, is going to interfere with the fit. That's why I think they put such a smaller oil filter in there, just for clearance purposes. But the nice thing is, you can see that little spout down there at the bottom that they molded into this piece of plastic trim here, which, you know, it does a fairly decent job of catching the oil drippings and guide them to a place to go so it doesn't spill all over the frame and everything. So that was kind of nice of them to put in. And you can see, based on the date, we put this oil filter in 11/25/21. Again, just to kind of reiterate that, just due to the way things are in the world, and still doing a lot of working from home, the oil changes on this haven't been done at the normal 3 months or 3,000, just because the truck hasn't been driven, and you saw that just by the condition of the oil coming out of here. Still looking good, but like I said, it's due for its annual inspection, and even though it hasn't moved much in the year, we're going to take the opportunity to change the oil. So that's what I like to do to my filters. It's just write the date on them that they got done, so that way I know when it got done. Like in this case, we can now look at it. No, we did that November 25th of last year. So it was around the end of November time frame of last year that we finished up the upper end performance work on this particular motor. And just to show you this here, I do use an oil filter wrench at times to help break them loose. It's not that they're over torqued on, it's just like with anything else with heat cycles and such, sometimes they're a little bit of a bear to get the seal to break. But when I put them on, I will put them on until the seal makes contact and turn it about another 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn from there, and then I'll stop. I do not use oil filter wrenches to tighten oil filters ever. That's just my preference. So I'm going to get up there, break this oil filter loose, and then we'll get the new filter on and start filling this bad boy back up. Bring it back in a bit. Bye. Real quickly, just wanted to show you that so you can kind of see just how that oil helps funnel down into the pan. It tries to help keep stuff away from the engine, chassis, and all that fun stuff. Well, let me get the rest of that filter spun off, and I'll bring you back. One moment. Okay, just to show you, we've got our new filter dated up here, and once again, silver Sharpies work wonderful for doing stuff like this, especially on dark colored oil filters. So we're just going to take a little bit of oil off our old oil filter, and don't worry, I know this is used oil, but as we saw, it's still relatively clean. And even if it wasn't, even if it was dark, nothing you put on the seal of this new filter is going to make its way into that engine. And as far as pre-filling the oil filter, obviously on this one, it's not a possible thing to do, because as you saw, the oil filter sits in there almost pretty level with the engine, so anything you poured in there would just pour out anyway. And there's a whole topic, a whole following on whether you should pre-fill your oil filters or not. It's almost as bad as putting out a video that talks about religion, politics, welding, or how to solder. But again, in this case, I'm just going to say that obviously in this one we can't do it just because of the angle of the filter. And whether I would do it anyway or not, I'm kind of on the belief that if the manufacturer doesn't do it and doesn't call for it, then it shouldn't be something that necessarily needs to be done. Now, if it's preference and you prefer to do that, then by all means, please continue to do what you're comfortable in doing. One thing about pre-filling an oil filter could do is that it could actually introduce contaminants back into engine oil and back into an engine oiling system. Because let's say you fill this up full of oil and some dirt falls down in it where you were filling it. Maybe not. So again, it's just one of those kind of one of those what-if scenarios that, again, it's just a real strong following about whether you should do it or you shouldn't do it. I'm kind of the mindset that if the manufacturer's documentation doesn't say to do it, then I should be perfectly fine if I don't do it. But in this case, again, it's kind of hard to do with the way the filter sits. Well, that's enough rambling on that. What I'm going to do is get this installed in place. As far as tightening, what I like to do is I will put this on until the gasket meets the flange. Then I'll take that same silver Sharpie and I'll just make a mark somewhere on the filter here, much like you see on our old one. And then I'll use that to help guide my additional 1/2 to 3/4 turn, just to make sure that I'm not over tightening this. And the reason why I wait until after the seal makes contact before I mark on the oil filter is that if I mark here and let's say it ended up over here before the gasket makes contact, then I can't see it from where I'm at underneath the truck. So I'm going to go ahead and get this installed and I'll bring you back. And welcome back. So we've got an oil filter reinstalled. You can see it up there. Let's see, there we go. And I'm just going to drain the oil out of the supercharger head unit. It's really no different than changing the oil in your vehicle. I pulled the dipstick out of the head unit and I'm just going to come down here to the drain line. You see, braided drain line you see there. I just got to tie wrap to a bracket on the power steering unit, I should say power steering gearbox or steering gearbox, just to keep it out of the way of anything spinning or moving. Now on this particular kit for the supercharger, that drain line was extra. It did not come with it. ProCharger highly suggests that you get one. And if you're going to be using this kit in this application, I highly suggest it as well, because without it, and hopefully you can see, follow that drain line up where it goes into the bottom bolt or bottom drain hole of that supercharger head unit. I should just say head unit. That would be very cumbersome to have to get behind that air tube or one of the air ports on that head unit in order to get, I should say, the discharge tube for the charged air is where you would have to go. You'd have to get behind that in the center to be able to get the drain plug out to drain the oil. So you can see this relocation kit gives you a nice bit of steel braided hose where you can relocate this elsewhere and make it a much easier job, because now we can get to it with a lot of space, fairly easy to get to it at the bottom since we already underneath here to drain the oil anyway. So again, some of their kits come with that drain relocation line, some do not. If it doesn't, again, can't stress enough, get the relocation kit. You're gonna thank yourself for doing that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this crack loose. It's just a plug that goes to the end of this line. So you just hold the outside one here and just crack it loose here. There's not very much oil in it, so you saw from the bottles there's about 6 or so ounces of oil in that unit. It doesn't take very long to drain. We'll get it drained and I'll bring you back for the refill. Catch you in a bit. Bye. And hopefully you can see that just kind of draining there. Like I said, you just have to kind of wait for it to just kind of finish dribbling out of there, and then put the plug back in and we'll refill it. But I'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and start. We've got our drain cap recapped for our I should say drain line recapped for our head unit for a supercharger. We're going to go ahead and start filling it. When you buy these bottles, like I said, for this particular kit, I ordered a kit of 3 bottles, and it comes with one of these cones at the top, or spouts if you want to call it, and you can remove it and put it on any of the 3 bottles that come in the kit. But don't lose this spout, because you only get 1 per kit. And the reason why I say that, not that you couldn't use something else, but you could see they have, or at least on this particular unit, they have you fill it through the dipstick tube. So without having some kind of fine tip on it, it's kind of hard to get this bottle in there to fill the unit. So that's my second tip for this particular unit, is that, you know, don't lose this little cap that comes with the bottles of oil. So we're gonna go ahead and get this filled up, and it's just like any unit. Like I said, it's just like doing an engine. No different than filling oil on an engine on anything. It comes with a little flexible dipstick tube that you see here. It's hard to see on this one. I'll see if I can find it. That's the one beef I have about this particular unit, is that this is black in color, and at least this particular unit's oil is kind of like a dark green, so it's hard to see where it is on this stick when you're checking the level. But on this, it's on one side of this. There it is right there. You probably can't see that, but there's a minimum, which is down here at the very end of this piece, and then a maximum. And usually what I like to shoot for is a little over halfway, maybe like 3/4 of the way up. You definitely don't want to be all the way at max when you fill this, because there are warnings in the manual that if you overfill this, you could put some undue stress on the internal bearings of this particular unit and actually cause some damage. So what I like to do is kind of put half to 3/4 of the bottle in, check it, and then just slowly walk up to my target area. But there it is right there on the stick. Like I said, you got max on this end of it and you got minimum on this end of it. But yeah, it is, just keep that in mind. It is kind of hard to see just because of the dark color at the end of this stick. I really wish they had used like some kind of lighter color to make that easier, but you know, it is what it is. Hopefully, like I said, this is an older head unit now. Hopefully they revise this, but just keep that in mind. And I'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. Now for probably one of the oldest tricks in the book. For some, it's not going to be new information at all, but for others, it might. So let's say you're changing the oil, and for whatever reason, you can't find your funnel, or you're just in need of one. And if you've got an area like this, and you just want to be concerned you're not splashing oil all over the place, although you could gingerly pour 7 bottles of this one in and not spill a drop if you take your time. But if you're just looking to make a really quick, simple funnel, what you can do is you can gingerly pour your first quart in your motor. When that's done, take yourself a standard box cutter, cut the top of this bottle off. And I'm going to leave it kind of high, and I'll show you why. But I'm going to cut the top of this off, and then presto, this will then become an instant funnel. So you can pour without causing too big of a mess. But I'm going to cut the top of this top off. I'm going to cut the top of this bottle off, and then I'll bring you back. Thank you much. So just to show you what that looks like, we got the top of that old one cut. And the reason why I left it so long, you can kind of see the back of the bottle where I turned it to wedge it against the little plastic trim off the firewall, just to help hold that straight so it doesn't flop over. But there you go, presto, instant funnel. And then you can continue to pour the remainder 6 quarts, at least in this particular engine. Let it continue to drink, without fear of splashing oil all over the place. Typically what I like to do is that generally I have found that this calls for 7 quarts of oil and takes all 7 to fill it. I'll generally put about 6.5 in, go ahead and start it, let it get the oil in the oil filter filled up, go ahead and let it prime the oil system, let it work for a little bit, and then I'll shut it all down and check it. And generally I have found that it does require the extra half, meaning it will generally take all 7 quarts to get it right on the marks of the stick where it belongs. But I'm going to go ahead and continue with that. As you can see, we've got most of our oil in our supercharger head unit. I'm just letting things kind of settle where they need to be after squirting the oil in, and I'll give this a few more minutes. We'll check it. If we need to, then we'll add more oil to it until we get to where it needs to be, and we'll go ahead and cap it off. But I'm going to work on getting the rest of this oil in, and I'll bring it back. Thank you much. So, real quick, just want to show you that so you can kind of see what I mean. Helps out quite a bit. And I think we've got our supercharger pretty much full at this point. Again, we just added a bit more to it. We're letting it settle. But just to kind of show you here, and this happened on the last oil change as well. You can see the previous oil change, there's about that much still left in the bottle. And even on this one, you can see there's about a little bit less than the same amount. And that's why it's kind of imperative that you sneak up on it, because even if you drain it and you add this entire 6 ounce in there, if you check their measurement, there's a pretty good bet you're going to be over full at that point. Because even if you let this thing drip for a while when you drain it, I mean, it is a self-contained unit, so you're going to have remnants of a small amount of the previous amount of oil that you had in here that's still coating the gears and the bearings and everything else on the inside. So I mean, it'll never be 100% empty, but like I said, that's just kind of why you might want to, again, just double check your measurements and sneak up on it, and just double check with your fill gauge that you're within where you need to be and that you're not overfill. Well, I'm going to continue to fill these up, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So we put 6.5 quarts in, we let it run for a little bit, and hopefully you can see that on the stick there, is that we're just not even up to the add bubble. So the first bubble you see here on the left is add, and this one's full. So we want to be somewhere in the middle of that. So adding the remainder of that 7th quart should get us where we need to go. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to recheck, and I'm going to bring it back. And just to let you know, the supercharger actually ended up taking pretty much 5.5 ounces. Actually, I shouldn't say that, about 5.8 to 5.9 ounces, pretty much the entire bottle. So we were able to drain out more oil on this change than what we did the previous one. But Again, that's why you always, you always double check your measurements, make sure that you're reading full. But I'm going to finish topping this off and I'll bring you back. And welcome back. So hopefully you can see that we're just past the circle with the add mark. We're probably right about here, maybe about almost midway, not quite midway, a little bit less, and that's kind of where I want it to be. Again, calls for 7, took 7. We're past the add mark, but you got to remember, I don't know if you can see it, we're on a little bit of a downward slant on here, so the truck is not perfectly level. So once the truck is leveled out, that should end up right in between our hash marks where we want it. So we're in the safe zone, but again, we know that we're on a little bit of slant, but when we straighten out, we should be exactly between our add and our full marks. So we'll be in the area that we need to be. So I'm good with that, and we're good with the supercharger oil level as well. So again, that'll button it up. I know it wasn't a very action-packed video, I should say that, but we're going to come back at you with some more content on the old TRX here. And the plan is that I'm going to try to make it down to pull apart to get some miscellaneous mounting hardware for the silver truck, for the headlights and such, because it looks like whoever modified the headlights on the gray one lost the original mounting bolts and such. So I'm hoping I can pull the miscellaneous hardware like that off one in a record yard. So we're going to pursue that, and then I'll bring you back on the gray one, and we'll more than likely tackle doing the dash install on the next one, as well as some additional bits and pieces. But that'll wrap it up for this video. And if you haven't considered doing so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're really trying to make it to that 1,000 subscription mark before the end of the year. Once we hit to that 1,000 mark, that'll allow us to continue to grow the channel and allow us to do more and more of these type of projects. Remember, we still have the 2012 Ram, the red one that you saw in the previous video, as an upcoming project as well. That one's going to get pretty interesting if we can proceed forward with the plans that we have for it. But with that being said, thank you much, and I'll bring you back on the next one. Thank you much. Bye.